From the lab to your ears, you're listening to WonderLabs.
Hello, and welcome to WonderLabs. This is Chris Richardson, checking in from London town. I said in the intro to this season that each episode will explore an idea that is changing how we think, or more importantly, how we act. Nowhere is this more obvious than in cognitive behavioural therapy, or Cbt. In recent years, I've become a bit obsessed with behavioural loops, and I now see them everywhere. Responding to a shitty text, or a comment that warrants no reply. Someone reaching for a cigarette as soon as a beer's in hand. Playing out things that have happened that can no longer be changed, or playing out things in the future that probably won't happen. Becoming aware of loops is the first step in dismantling them, even flipping them around. And I found that the most effective way of generating present state awareness, in order to break those loops, is meditation. And at the tail end of a 10-day silent retreat, when we finally got our voices back, I met an interesting fellow traveller who's since become a good friend. Rebecca Samuels is a cognitive behavioural therapist who spends her days trying to improve people's mental health by changing how they think and act. She's had an interesting career working at music festivals, prisons, and was part of the response team following the Grenfell Tower tragedy. Throughout the coronavirus pandemic, she's been working with patients remotely. In this episode, we cover the fundamentals of Cbt, the evolution of mental health treatment facilities, and what Rebecca has learned from her wide-reaching experiences. We also discuss the false dichotomy of body and mind, how things have changed since the start of the pandemic, and some of Rebecca's likely upcoming work involving psychedelic therapy. If you haven't yet listened to our episodes with Imperial College London's Centre for Psychedelic Research, or the short documentary on Psilocybin Therapy, I suggest having a look at those back in Season 1. Without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with Rebecca Samuels. Rebecca, hello.
Hello, Chris. Shall I pour the tea?
Yeah, actually, let's do that. Nice. It's a cinnamon tea.
My favourite.
Thank you. Okay, now we can begin. Actually, I thought it would be interesting just to talk about how we met.
Yeah.
So, we met on a silent meditation retreat.
An unusual place to meet.
Yeah, especially given that you're not talking for 10 days, and yet you somehow get a sense of somebody's energy based on how they're moving through the space.
Mm-hmm.
And also the fact that you were sitting with my wife, kind of seemingly friends, sitting on benches with tea, although you weren't really speaking, but it was this kind of cute little dynamic that was going on.
Yeah, well, she was my roomie.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, it was kind of interesting how like those conversations unfolded on the final day when we finally got our voices back, and that we've been able to keep in touch, and now here we are.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was my first Vipassana that I'd done, and I met your wife immediately, and we clicked for using our natural cycles contraception. That's where we bonded because I noticed her thermometer.
Little plug there as well.
Yeah, do recommend if you want to go hormone free. And yeah, then we kind of support each other. It's interesting when you do Vipassana because you pick up on subtleties and behaviours, and you can support each other without words. And then, yeah, I got to speak to you at the end and bonded over our common interests. So that was really great.
So where were you at in your life at that point in time? What were you up to?
Gosh, I was training to be a CBT therapist, cognitive behavioural therapist, and had just split up from my boyfriend of 7 years. So I just moved out, and I did a Vipassana to kind of clear my mind and make plans.
For better or for worse.
Yeah. And my intention that summer was to start. Well, my training was going to finish in September, so we met in March, and my training was going to finish in September, and my plan was to then become a CBT therapist, but really try and work with the psychedelic therapy that was starting to become quite, it was really starting to get the ball rolling on. The weekend after we were up with Vipassana, I had training for Psycare, which is a psychedelic charity that support people at music festivals. So yeah, that was the point in my life. I was trying to combine both therapeutic modalities.
So you came from a traditional psychology background, but
Yes.
then sort of segueing into this booming research area
Mm-hmm.
that potentially offers some new tools. We definitely will get to that. But to start off with, can you talk about some of your earlier experiences and the kind of work that you've been doing with patients?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, as you say, I started traditionally. So I did a psychology undergrad. And during my final year, you get to pick your modules. And I did forensic psychology and decided that I wanted to be a forensic psychologist.
What is a forensic psychologist?
So forensic in Latin means of law. So forensic science is legal science. Forensic psychology is legal psychology. So it's working with mentally ill offenders, either at the time of they were either mentally ill at the time of their crime or became mentally ill in prison and then get transferred to a secure hospital. So I don't really agree with the penal system. It's more I wanted to go into rehabilitation to try and understand why they did what they do and trying to help prevent reoffending.
Right.
So that was my intention and motivation. And I had a placement in a lower medium secure unit in London and found it so fascinating. I really enjoyed it, working with quite severe and complex people. And through all these experiences, I really learned that I remember I was 21 when I started doing that. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is so scary. Like, this is really, really terrifying. And then I realized, like, they're just people and I don't condone what they did. It's never an excuse for violence, but it really helped me understand the things that led them to what they did.
So, incidentally, we watched One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest last night, which I think is a fantastic film. Still not read the book. I'm assuming that that's probably not what care looked like when you were involved, but how have things changed since that time, and what does your average facility look like for dealing with mentally unwell patients?
Yeah, well, this is the thing that I really liked about the care package. As I say, I really like a holistic care approach, and every team has a psychologist, a psychiatrist who's the responsible clinician. They're the ones who deal with medication and overall have the responsibility. The social worker, occupational therapist. Yeah, there's a whole team of us all dealing with every aspect of that person's life. And nurses, obviously, like the nurses, I always call them the soldiers. They're the frontline workers who really understand them the best, I think. And yeah, all of us are working together to try and help different aspects of their life. So it's very different. I mean, medication is still used. In One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, they used ECT, electric compulsive therapy. Mm-hmm. And frontal lobotomy, which is not used anymore. ECT is, but only in more extreme cases, and that's done very, very differently, where I think the person is given anaesthetic before they're given it, and I think that's kind of a last resort as well.
Sure. As a quick aside, did you ever visit the Wellcome Trust's exhibition Bedlam?
Bedlam, no, I didn't, and I really wanted to, but did you go?
I did, yeah. It was really interesting seeing the evolution of the insane asylum through to asking people with mental health conditions what their ideal treatment facility would look like, and then everything in between as well. The way that they designed the space, I don't know if this was intentional, but it began sort of very dark, very claustrophobic, very sort of difficult to move through the space, and it kind of gradually, as you move through the rooms, became more sort of open plan, spacious, bright light coming in through the windows. So even on a subconscious level, as you moved through the exhibition, you went on this journey from something that was quite dark and constrictive to something that was quite uplifting. Okay,
that's interesting. Well, I visited Broadmoor, which is a high security hospital. So that's for the most dangerous. And that was really beautiful, actually. They had it's by the South Downs, and people that are on their best behaviour could go onto the area where you get an amazing view of the South Downs. And by there they have a vegetable garden, which again, people that are on their best behaviour can go and grow vegetables, and they use some of the stuff to use in the kitchen as well, which is so, so wonderful, because I think nature programmes aren't really used, and we know how important it is for us to be in nature, how to be grounded, and what we can learn by watching something grow, and you being responsible for that. I think you could teach a lot. So it's really wonderful to see that they had those sorts of things there, which is very different from what One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or even your imagination of something being very closed. Actually, no, there's a lot of greenery and spaces to develop in different ways, and some of them were even chefs in the kitchen, so they really learned some skills.
That is really interesting, and I feel that even sort of being trapped within a city and not having much access to nature, and the effect that has on affect, mood. Yeah, again, the end of that Bedlam exhibition, it was just this facility that was basically integrated into trees and into nature. And actually the final activity in that exhibition was a small slip of paper that you're supposed to keep in your wallet that I've actually still got several years later, basically saying, these are the 3 things I need to maintain my mental health and to stay balanced. These are 3 things I can do to help other people around me to stay balanced.
Wow, that's
which
wonderful.
is really sweet.
Yeah. You know, we kind of try and do that in therapy now as a CBT therapist. At the end of treatment, it's like, well, what are the things that are useful for you? What are your, and even when I was working in the forensic unit, we also create that, like, what are the things that I can go back to, almost like a card that I can be like, okay, these are the things that are useful for me, just in case you forget. And these are the people that I can call, and these are the places that are good for me. So I think that's a really good thing that they encourage you to do.
Yeah. And maybe a nice segue as well then. So from those days into cognitive behavioural therapy, maybe you can just demystify what that actually means.
Yeah.
What is CBT?
Well, to explain my route into it, I really enjoyed my placement and year studying, but I also became a bit disillusioned with the system. Not to say that it's a bad system, but yeah, it just didn't feel right for me. I wanted to work more with the general population. So then I looked elsewhere. So I continued working as an assistant psychologist and was in quite a lot of trauma services. I also worked for Grenfell, the disaster response team, and gathered enough experience to then apply for the cognitive behavioural therapy training. I feel like you were about to ask me a question.
Yeah, I was going to just interrupt on the Grenfell stuff as well.
Yeah. The Grenfell stuff was super interesting. Obviously, that was an unprecedented thing. So, like, everything I'd learned actually was scrapped. It's like, this is don't go into this being a psychologist, go into it being a human, because these people have just lost everything. So I was part of the outreach team. So there was 3 teams. Initially it was the disaster response team, then the first team was the outreach team, which was basically just do anything to support people, and then the adult psychology team and the child team developed after that. And then the outreach team kind of became the safety net, so anything that wasn't traditional we'd go and do. So it was really trying to engage people and help them understand what the services are around. I mean, at first it's a community psychology thing really that happened. It affected the community, it affected the estate, and all the estates nearby really. There's a really great sense of community. So obviously at the beginning a lot of volunteers were trying to do the work, but the NHS is a wonderful body and it has the structure to help support people, and the volunteers did their best, but after a while they became tired, so and mentally exhausted. So something
I'm sure you're seeing as well this year, but
yeah, and in fact it's like things I've learned from Grenfell is really applicable to what's going on now. But so our role at the beginning was to just be a sense of familiarity after disaster, so after 9/11 as well. People just need to know, to see things that are familiar, because what's just happened is so unsafe, so scary, that they just need a sense of familiarity. So at the beginning it was just building relationships, and then helping people understand what trauma is, not trying to pathologize it because they didn't need to, but just helping them understand what services and what help they can get. But actually what the people really wanted was alternative therapies. And what I mean by that is acupuncture, massage, yoga.
Interesting.
They're the things that people want. And that's exactly what was found after 9/11 as well. People didn't want to talk about it. They just wanted to feel better in some way. And that was the thing that really motivated me I read the book, The Body Keeps a Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that just opened my eyes about how trauma is held in the body. And then from that point, I was like, well, CBT psychology is great, but it's limited because we're just focused on the mind, and we're whole mind and body. Why are we treating them as separate things? And so then I was like, okay, I need to train as a yoga teacher and a massage therapist to try and work out the rest of the body and how I can integrate them together.
Yeah, and that really ties into the whole holistic philosophy as well.
Yeah.
And completely with you, I truly don't understand the false dichotomy of body and mind, given that the brain is a physical thing that floats around in your head.
Exactly. Like, I'm looking at you now. You're not separate mind and body. You're one. So we should treat it as one. Like, I think a lot of people get disappointed when they hear that it's stress that's causing their physical ill health. It's like, oh, they almost want something else. But it's like, why wouldn't it be stress? Stress releases cortisol, and cortisol we know affects the body. And it's almost like, it's interesting kind of linking it into CBT that stress or anxiety, whatever you want to call it, whatever that beast is, it's there to protect you. It's there to keep you alive.
Right.
And it will come out at you in a way that really impacts you. So, for example, you can try and suppress it. But if you're someone, so I remember a colleague of mine was working with a head teacher. She was very like, very, very stressed, obviously. But also she was presenting. She was the face of the school. And she started getting a twitch on her face that wouldn't go. And no matter what therapy they were doing, it stayed there until they realised, well, your anxiety is making it come out on your face, because that's the only way you're going to stop and listen and actually do something about it. And I see it a lot with health anxiety. I think a lot of men present with, in my experience, I don't know what the statistics are, but in my clinical practice, a lot of men present with health anxiety, and it's almost like, well, this is the only way that anxiety is going to knock on your door and be like, you know, you need to go get help.
So what does that look like exactly?
Health anxiety is people preoccupied with their health, so believing that there's something wrong with them, despite the fact that there's no evidence for it. So they go to the GP a lot, and they really think that they've got a heart problem, or a lot of people come with like twitches in their legs, or they think they have motor neuron disease, or think they have cancer or brain tumor, and the doctors just haven't found it out yet. So it's like working on those sorts of things. And generally people tend to have the behaviors of checking their body a lot, or Googling symptoms, which then makes their anxiety worse.
Right.
So it's kind of about changing that. But I guess you asked me earlier about what CBT is, so maybe this is a good way of going back to that. So CBT stands for Cognitive Behavioural Therapy. Cognitions is the way that we think about the world. So some people think in images, some people think in words, some people think in both. And it's about how are you interpreting things? What are your perceptions of things? How do you react to things? And the behavioural aspect is, well, how do you act in the world? What do you do about that? What are you doing in terms of, usually in anxiety disorders, it's avoidance or behaviours that kind of make you feel safer. Depression, it tends to be withdrawal. And the idea of CBT is that it's not an event that causes your distress. So it's not that you've lost a job. It's not because of COVID. It's not because whatever, the relationship ending. Obviously, they're really, really bad things, but it's what is your interpretation of it? How are you making sense of that? And the CBT kind of looks at 4 interacting systems. So the way that we think, what we do, the way that we feel emotionally, and our physical body. So it does include the physical body, which I spend quite a lot of time focusing on. Because our body senses the world. So yeah, it kind of looks at, well, if you're thinking in a dysfunctional way or a distorted way, usually with depression, you distort any information that you get to fit your negative idea of yourself,
right,
others, or the future. And anxiety is you overestimate danger and underestimate your ability to cope with it.
Mm-hmm. So I guess you've spoken a bit about health anxiety. What other things do you commonly see in the people that come to you?
Yeah, so depression, anxiety disorders, social anxiety is one of the most prevalent. So I see that quite a lot. I think most people have social anxiety, maybe not in terms of being a diagnosis, but I think it makes sense why we want to be liked by other people. Like, we're pack animals. We think evolutionary, we had to be liked. Otherwise, people weren't hunting for us. People weren't protecting our children. Who's going to look after us? So, like,
if you're ostracized, you're out of the tribe and you're going to get eaten by something.
Exactly. Right? So we needed to really make sure that we were liked. Nowadays, we don't have that threat, but we haven't stopped thinking like that, and maybe not even in a conscious way. So it's no wonder that people are scared that they're not liked. And one of the common things is people are going to think I'm boring. It goes into this avoidance thing. So perhaps you think you're boring. So it's like, I'm not going to go to that party because then everyone's going to find out how boring I am. So you don't go. And then it stays true. Yeah, it's possible that everyone's going to find out how boring you are. But unless you go to that party and maybe you talk to a couple of people and they laugh at one of your jokes, or maybe you just get on and connect with at least one person, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 5, whoever, then that's the only thing that was going to maybe challenge that thought of, maybe I'm not so boring.
So CBT is effectively trying to flip the switch on that loop.
Absolutely. And we challenge it through your thinking, but what I really like about CBT is the experiential part of it. It's like, really, a lot of people say, well, I know what I'm thinking about is so irrational, but I can't help but feel that way. And CBT kind of, through the experiential stuff, closes that gap. Other things we see is OCD, PTSD, panic disorder. So that's a fear of having a panic attack because people think they're going to die or they're going to go crazy. And I think you got it spot on. I guess with CBT, what we're trying to do is decenter the person from their thoughts. So yeah, anxiety happens really quickly, but actually if you can slow it down, like, you then have some choice of whether to be like, okay, I can see this as anxiety, or is this actually something really, really bad that's going to happen to me? So a lot of times I ask people, where is the danger here? Because anxiety is a good thing. We need it. because it helps us react to danger. But if the danger's not there, then maybe it's not so helpful anymore. So a lot of the time we call anxiety a bully. It's kind of just like holding you down, and like until you stand up to it, until you can actually get a space from it, it's going to keep bullying you.
Right. The way that I think about it often is you need to know that you're in a loop in order to pull yourself out of it.
Exactly. So actually, when I do assessments with people, I describe CBT, the lineage of CBT in this way. The first appointment is an assessment where we can both get to a shared understanding of what your problem is. Next, we do a formulation, which is trying to really understand what are the contributing factors, what's your history, what's contributing to it now, what are your thoughts, feelings, emotions, behaviours. And then the next bit is becoming conscious of your problem. So conscious of your thoughts. Because until you're conscious of it, how are you possibly going to change it? So and that's one of the hardest bit, is really becoming aware of these things. And then once you're aware of it, then you can move to the next stage, which is changing it, which is some of the experiential work that we've done, or thought challenging, things like that.
So a lot of the things you mentioned that you commonly see, anxiety, depression, OCD, post-traumatic stress, health anxiety, those are all mental health challenges that I imagine were quite prevalent in society anyway. But with everything that's happened over the last year, and people not even being able to go to the party to be proven by other people to be boring because they're now stuck in their homes, how has the landscape changed during the COVID-19 pandemic?
So I guess by nature of the NHS, the waiting lists are really long. So people that I'm actually seeing now have been on the waiting list before the pandemic even started. But we thought that we were going to get a spike in referrals, and actually we're seeing a drop in referrals.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's probably because of the whole Save the NHS. People are like, because it's not just mental health services, it's like a lot of cancer services aren't seeing referrals as high because people are delaying it.
Right.
And actually it's like, Save the NHS isn't about that. If you've got a concern, go get help sooner rather than later. So we saw a drop in referrals. It's starting to spike up again. I suspect that, I don't know when, but I think there will be a spike in referrals in the near future. Because for me personally, this has affected my mental health. And I can't imagine, like, for a lot of people what it's doing, because I think it brings up a lot of things that we haven't really dealt with, and kind of being on your own and dealing with these things. You've got no distractions anymore. So a lot of things are coming up for people. So if you've got nothing else to do, go refer yourself to your local service, because now is a really good time to seek therapy. But the things that I'm seeing now, so now I'm working, all the services in London are doing created a pathway for people that have been affected by COVID, so they get seen first, and that's a national directive. The same thing with disasters. So if you've been involved in a terrorist attack or Grenfell, you'll get something like Grenfell. Hopefully that never happens again, but you'll get seen first. You'll get priority. So it's the same with COVID. For me personally, I've just started doing the intervention, and a lot of the people I'm seeing have got pre-existing health conditions. So a lot of OCD and health anxiety.
It's almost like the virus itself, right? It's probably compounding some of the existing health issues that people had already. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of fear in the media as well, which is making people... I guess the issue with mental health problems is it's fine to have all these beliefs about yourself, but it's the rigidity that you hold on to it. I always use this example of, like, do it with me now. It's like clench your fists really tightly. What does it feel like?
Pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah. And like, can you feel tension?
Sure.
Yeah. So I can feel tension in, like, my lower arm. Now release it. What does it feel like now?
Slightly more relaxed and calm.
Yeah. And I use this as an analogy of the tighter that you hold on to these beliefs about yourself or how you think the world should be, the more tension it creates in your mind and in your body. And the fear of the media is making people hold on even tighter, because now they're like, well, there's a reason. And there is a reason, of course.
4,871 new cases yesterday.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, I'm going to hold on for dear life, because if I don't hold on, something really, really awful is going to happen. And it's not even in my head anymore. It's in the media, and it's really scary.
And also, people don't really see the cost that it has. So why not be safe and scared and worried?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really nice way of looking at it, actually. It's like, it makes sense to do this, but what is the cost on your life? How restricted is your life becoming? It's so important for us to be outside. I keep saying to people, just stay active, stay connected. No matter when you start to feel that darkness or that anxiety come over you, just move your body. You don't even need to go. I mean, I really recommend going outside. But even if you can't do that, just get up and jump. Just move your body. Get fresh blood flow to your brain, to all the organs. Just move.
Quick aside, are you familiar with any of the circumstances surrounding the Blitz in the Second World War? From my understanding, there was a government department basically tasked with monitoring the population to understand the state of everyone's mental health. And there was this big fear that there was going to be this huge surge in the number of bad things that were happening. But actually what they found during that time is that not only did the number of self-reported problems drop, but also the cities that were least heavily bombed actually did see increases in those problems. There's a guy called Sebastian Junger who wrote a book called Tribe that talks about it. But essentially the idea is that when faced with this giant challenge, when you can come together as a community, you mitigate a lot of those issues that we would think would skyrocket during such a time. But the difference now being is that obviously we have this big problem, but we're trapped in our homes and can't connect in the same way. Yeah,
so that is a big problem that we're seeing. And that's why I say stay active and stay connected. And sense of community is so protective. We know that. And I don't think it's really enforced enough. But if you can stay connected in any way, whether that's Zoom calls, I know that it's not the same, and I don't want us to go down a route of that's where you're going to get your form of connection. But for now, and I guess the other thing I learned from meditation is everything is temporary. This is not going to last. This is not going to go on forever. Everything is temporary. So that even maybe it's not ideal to do Zoom calls or whatever other platform you want to use, but just do what is right for you in this moment. And just stay connected. Meet people when you can outside or whatever. It's so important. I think there's such a fear about your physical health, but I think the main thing is going to be mental health. And in order to protect your physical health, look after your mental health, because as I say, they're not separate. So the more robust your mental health is, the more robust your physical health is going to be. So if you're really worried about your physical health, then make sure your mental health is in good stead, and the other way around, vice versa. But something interesting about OCD, I guess OCD has also got a lot of misconceptions. A lot of people think it's like flicking the light switch and having things in order, which can be true, but it's a whole range of things. There's obsessive compulsive disorder, so obsessions are the intrusions. And now 90% of the general population have intrusions.
What are intrusions?
So things that you don't really want to think. So like I sometimes have it of imagining my manager talking to me and imagining her naked. I don't want to be thinking that.
Sure.
I also have it sometimes where I see people walking down the street with pizza boxes, and then an intrusion comes in my mind where I just want to like whack it out of their hands.
Yeah, I get that all the time.
And I'm not a violent person. I wouldn't want to do that. I don't want to do that. It's just an intrusion. And some people have it when they're crossing a bridge and they think they're going to jump off, or people think they're going to jump in front of a train and they don't want to do that. But 90% of the people have this. The difference between people with the general population OCD is that with people with OCD, they misinterpret. It's again thinking about interpretations. They misinterpret that has a stronger meaning than it actually does. So general population can just be like, oh, that's a silly thought. Other people are like, well, what does that mean about me? It must mean I'm like a pervert, or it must mean that I want to hurt myself or hurt other people. It must mean I'm a terrible person. And that's where it comes back with more force. So then people do compulsions, which are behaviors to neutralize that thought. So some people might have to like, maybe if it's their thinking of jumping in front of the train, they might have to like rub themselves in some way, or clench or do something or think something to,
okay.
But then also with OCD there's contamination, which is really what we're seeing in terms of the link with COVID. So we've been told to wash our hands for 20 seconds more regularly, sanitize. But with people with OCD, they do it excessively,
right.
To the point where they're getting sores in their hands. I'm treating a woman at the moment who cleans all her groceries with bleach and vinegar. She's on her hands and knees scrubbing the floor and everything all day. And it's too much. And actually what we're finding in terms of your microbiome, you need some germs in you to build your fight against viruses. So the more you clean, the more at risk you are of getting a virus. So actually it's counterintuitive doing this contamination stuff. And I think it's about, firstly, is with the media, it's, well, where are you actually getting your information from? Make sure you're coming from good sources. I can send a really good infographic afterwards, and that's updated daily to really find out what things look like. Some people find words too much, so it's a really nice way of looking at it.
Information is beautiful?
Yes. exactly.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
Really good. So find out where that's coming from, and also think about what you're doing in terms of you're catastrophizing these things, but actually some of your behaviors might make the unintended consequences of having more likely to get a virus.
Right.
So I think it's just like learning those sorts of things. And that's a lot of things I think with CBT. A lot of people do things as part of their solution, which end up becoming the problem.
You've already alluded to the fact that with all of these conditions, this isn't a binary thing that exists, but it's more of a continuum. And to some extent, we probably all find ourselves at some level along that. And even if you are fortunate enough to not be struggling with something, we still would all benefit by putting in these practices into our lives, if for no other reason than to actually maintain a healthy body. To me, it seems really strange that, at least historically, we've treated mental health in such a way that people only go to seek help when something bad has happened and something has gotten so bad that it's now no longer manageable, which seems like the equivalent of waiting until you're obese before deciding to go to the gym.
Yeah, my friend uses a really good analogy. She's like, you can spend up to £30 to £100 a month on a gym membership, depending on what gym you go to, or even less than that. And it's like, well, that's great to work on your physical health, but again, why don't we do that for our mental health? Because really, perhaps our physical health will get better if our mental health is better. Things will just flow a little bit easier. It'll be a bit easier, and our relationships will improve.
Completely.
And a lot of the time that I see people, it's like, it's not just you that you're helping, it has a ripple effect, whether that's in your relationships or because people have learned something that they share with their friends and then their friends get better. It's a beautiful thing to see. Really what we're teaching people is to become their own therapists and to teach other people.
One of the things I do want to ask you, not to put you out of a job, but to what extent do you consider the different challenges that people are facing to be symptomatic of something that's not quite functioning well in our society? And to that extent, could it be argued that the kinds of services we're offering are really offering a plaster to something without really addressing the root of the problem?
Very, very interesting. Yes. Some of the difficulties I have with CBT is that we're not trying to do this, but it kind of feels like we're blaming the person. It's because if you're not thinking the right way or you're not doing things right, that it's causing your problems, which there's an element of truth to it, but it can feel quite uncomfortable. And actually there's other models of thinking systemically, which looks at, well, is it our culture? Is it society? Is it politics? Is it your family? These things also contributing to your mental distress or ill health. And I think with psychosis, the medical model is very much like you've lost touch with reality. Whereas shamanic traditions, they tend to look at it, they tend to hold it in a different way, which is perhaps you do see reality in a different way, but that's not a bad thing. And maybe we can learn something from you. And then if you treat it differently, so if you're psychotic and you have to be sectioned, you go to this clinical hospital. It's a terrifying thing to happen to you when you're taken off to a hospital. You have that unfamiliarity, all these people you don't know, people giving you drugs that you don't want, and you don't know what's going to happen to you. Of course, you're going to react by getting defensive. We're here to really survive and reproduce, so this is a threat to your survival, so you'll do anything to protect yourself.
So one of the things I know we're both interested in is the application of psychedelics to mental health. And for anyone who hasn't listened to the previous episodes with Chris Timmerman from the Imperial Center for Psychedelic Research, or the episode with Dr. Andrew Gallimore on dimethyltryptamine, I'd suggest going to check those out. But from your angle, how do you see these two worlds coming together?
Okay, so just a bit of background and context as well, I guess. So I've personally found psychedelics very healing for me. For me, it's kind of like the end goal with psychedelic therapy and CBT, which I do, is the same. You're kind of trying to shift someone's perspective and help them see a different way of looking at things. And people, the more rigid you're thinking, the more ingrained it is in your mind. So the more therapy you have to do. But with psychedelics, it acts as a catalyst. It helps people see a change much quicker. So I really wanted to combine them, and I follow a lot of the research. And then through that training I did, I then got involved with the King's College Research Group, the psychedelic research group. They've got a trial coming up for treatment-resistant depression. And yeah, I did the guide training for that. And just, I think, there's lots of different descriptions of what psychedelic means, but it's like mind manifesting or soul manifesting. I need to double check that, but
yeah, I think both of those translations. Yeah,
but yeah, it really just helps people. They use a lot of analogies, which is kind of like, imagine you're on a ski slope and you're going down this ski slope and you keep going down the same path, and it's easier because you're instantly go down the road already mapped out. It's easier. With CBT or any sort of therapy, what you want to do is be like, well, yeah, that might be easier, but what if we went that way? You're going to get a bit of resistance, but if you went that way, then maybe you'd see a different side of the mountain, and you might be able to see things differently. And psychedelics just helps it go a little bit smoother. It's not the easiest. Bill Richards is one of the grandfathers of psychedelic research. He was involved in it in the 50s, 60s, 70s before it became illegal, and now it's upsurge. He's working in it again, and he describes it as, imagine you're at the top of on a swimming pool.
Diving board?
That's the one. So you're on the top of a diving board and you're looking down at the water and you don't know how deep it is and you don't know what the temperature is going to be like, but you're going to have to jump anyway. And it's quite terrifying. So the first bit of psychedelic therapy is quite scary. But then once you get into it, you realise at first you might be like, and it's like, oh, actually, if I just relax into this, maybe I can have something to learn. And the idea is really to go into these experiences, just like everything I've said so far in terms of CBT therapy, that really feel those emotions, really go towards those monsters. This is particularly psilocybin therapy, which is the psychoactive substance in magic mushrooms, because MDMA therapy works slightly different, but kind of the same approach, which just allows you to face these things with a bit more compassion and with less fear. So you would have heard of setting for people that haven't. Set is your mindset. So what is your mindset going into it? So the therapy really is in 3 stages. There's preparation, which is really preparing the person for what the therapy is going to be like, managing expectations as well. And that, as a therapist, your role there is really to build trust, especially in the trials, because you don't have much time. So it's really to be genuine and be human and build that trust quite quickly, and get the person to say, what do you think is going to happen, and manage the expectations of what it could be like, and to say to them, like, we're going to encourage you to keep going deeper and deeper, because once you start, like, it's better to go into it. The more resistance you have, actually, kind of like the fist, the more resistance you have, more tension you have, the more problems it's going to cause. So preparation is really important to prepare the mindset. Then you've got the dosing day, and that's the setting aspect of it. And setting is a really safe environment with people that you trust. In the psychotherapeutic model, it's usually mixed gender, male and female. And your job as a therapist there is really to be a grounding source, and because the wisdom is the person, they know their experience the best. And the setting is also, they have headphones on, listen to some music, and they're blindfolded. So the idea is to really go internal, because you know yourself best. You're going to work yourself out. But we're here just to encourage you to be safe and to hold you if you need to be held, and really encourage you to go deeper and deeper and deeper. And then the final stage, which is just as important, if not more important, is the integration.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the sessions will be. In the clinical trials, again, we don't have much time, so there isn't much integration. But the idea is that's really where the therapeutic stuff is going to be, because now you've had these discoveries. What does it mean to you? How are you going to integrate that into your life? How can you, rather than just being a one-off thing, what can you take from that, and how can you apply it to your life so that you have those lasting changes? So the idea is really to the dosing, the medicine, you need less and less, and it's really the integration afterwards that is helpful.
And these things, I follow the research, and I'm really impressed with at least the provisional data from the trials that seems to be coming out to suggest that, you know, these compounds have the potential to be better therapeutics than our existing gold standards for a lot of these mental health conditions. The question of legality is one that I find quite interesting as well. So I know Rick Doblin, who is running the MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, has been very vocal historically about the deliberate selection of groups from within the power structure, essentially. So deliberately targeting veterans with post-traumatic stress, because historically in the States where he's based, the figure of the veteran is something that people can connect with, something that resonates with people. These people have gone out and fought for their country, and now they're suffering, and we need to give them the best possible treatment. And really being quite tactical in using that to sort of gain leverage for these things to then be used more widely in the population, which I think it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, he actually did a master's, I think, in public policy to really understand how to do this. And he worked on what Americans really going to care about, and they care about their veterans. They're patriotic. So if we can make them better, because I think the veterans, and I don't know too much about this, is also from my experience and from what I've heard, is that especially in the UK, aftercare, working in the army, you're not looked after so well, and I wonder if it's the same in the US. But
I think so. Yeah.
And so I think having this is really useful, and it's the only way you're going to get people to listen. It's the same kind of thing. Like, I think the mistakes in the 70s is that there was so much propaganda and so much fear, and so now what Rick has been saying is, well, let's speak the language. If we're in an evidence-based care model, then let's talk science. Let's find the data so that we can actually convince you that this is powerful, and alongside that, let's mix it with veterans who you also care about. And it's been super successful. They're now almost about to reschedule it for medical usage. MDMA, yeah. And he's been doing trauma work. So the difference between psilocybin and MDMA is that, so just a bit of context with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is neurologically, so the amygdala that we were speaking about earlier, that's your fear response, your fight or flight, and that gets over-aroused, so it gets bigger during a trauma. And then lots of the memories get stuck there. And the prefrontal cortex gets smaller, and that's where all your rational thinking goes. So during a trauma, that goes offline because it doesn't need to be active. You're there just to survive. So a lot of things get stuck there, and then anything after the trauma's passed, anything that reminds you of the trauma, your amygdala is super ready to fight again, and so you get re-triggered a lot of the time. Traditional talking therapies, the idea is if we talk about it in detail, in a lot of detail, we can move those bits that have got stuck in the amygdala and move it over to the rational thinking. The difficulty is, for me, is as a therapist, it's like asking someone to relive the most painful thing that has ever happened to them, and physical pain and mental pain is in the same part of the brain, so it feels exactly the same, it feels horrible, and I'm asking them to do that without any anesthetic. Right. And it almost feels like when you're about to go into surgery, you'd never do that without any anesthetic. And so it almost feels like MDMA, what it does is neurologically it shrinks the amygdala and increases the prefrontal cortex so that you can actually think about it without so much of a fear response. You can process it in a much more rational way, which you can't do usually. And so I say it's anesthetic because it kind of allows it to process without so much pain. Obviously there is pain as well, it's not for everyone, but yeah, it just seems like a much more humane way of dealing with these things. I think it's kind of like, I think once these therapies become legal, we'll look back at therapy and be like, wow.
You did what?
Yeah, why would you make someone do that? That's so mean.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll still continue doing it. For some people it does work, but for some people it doesn't. And I think all of this is giving people more choice.
Whether it's the stuff that MAPS is doing with MDMA over in the US, or the stuff that's happening over here with psilocybin, or any of the other, multitude of studies that are taking place. It's a really fascinating research space. And again, some of these things are now in phase 3 clinical trials, which is the final stage before being authorized for use. So a lot of exciting things happening in that space. How do you see your work segueing into that?
Well, for me personally, I really want to really establish myself as a therapist. I think the most important thing is having experience working with people and people's problems without the psychedelic aspect first. The more experience I have, the better I'll be to deal with whatever the psychedelic experience throws. So that, I also want to develop my yoga practice, yoga teacher practice, and body work. So really going to focus on that. And as that's happening, hopefully the psychedelic research continues, and I'm involved in the research. I haven't started yet, but hopefully that can continue, get more experience through that, and hopefully, just like America, we'll start to see it being used for medical use, and more clinics will be opening in the UK's that I can work in and use it. I mean, I'd also like to continue CBT as well, because I do think it has value, but psychedelic work I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I'm really excited to seeing how all of that unfolds, and also following you on your journey.
Yeah, thank you.
Before I let you go, we usually wrap up with a quick fire round.
Okay.
I already know the answer to this, but Which emerging field or technology are you most excited about?
Psychedelic therapy.
If you could wave a magic wand and shift our collective thinking on one thing, what would it be?
Moving from fear to love.
Do you have a psychology-related joke or fact for us?
Oh my God. No, these sort of things make my mind go blank.
I've got one.
Go.
A Freudian slip. It's when you say one thing and mean your mother.
Just a reference, seeing your face doing that was really funny.
What's one thing that everyone should do after listening to this?
Be curious about yourself and other people, and genuinely curious.
Rebecca Samuels, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning into WonderLabs. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who you think might enjoy it. You can also email us at wonderlabspod@gmail.com. This is your host, Chris Richardson. Our brand was designed by Lloyd Preston Allen, and our jingle was produced by T. Fitzgerald at For The Record. You can find more music from For The Record at soundcloud.com/WEAREFTR. Special thanks go out to Liliana Laborde-Dozian. We'll see you next time.